Something about this past week felt off, but not in any obvious way. There was no drama in the sky, no cosmic event demanding your attention. And yet, the air felt heavier than usual. The silence didn't feel peaceful, it felt loaded. The kind of stillness that made your thoughts louder, your emotions more sensitive, your reactions harder to explain. Many people felt tired without reason, emotionally on edge, distracted, or strangely disconnected. But this wasn't confusion. It wasn't emotional instability. It was spiritual reception. You weren't reacting, you were receiving. Not information, but energy. Not words, but whispers. Because this wasn't a week of clarity or conclusion. It was a week of hidden questions. Quiet pressure. Moments that seemed small but landed deeply. It was the feeling that something was trying to reach you, not through logic, but through sensation. Through timing. Through the space between conversations. And if you felt that, if your body carried something all week that your mind couldn't explain, then you weren't alone. You were tuned in. You were hearing what others missed. If something moved in you this week without needing a reason, comment 111 below. Not as a trend, but as a quiet confirmation, you heard it too. Now let's unfold what this week was really trying to say, because it didn't arrive with noise. It arrived with intention. Wrapped in silence. Waiting to be noticed. The full moon has come and gone, but the air hasn't cleared. Not yet. From April 14th to 16th, many found themselves walking through the echo, not the peak of the Libra full moon, but the residue. The after sound. The invisible ringing that happens when something spiritual has stirred so deeply, it takes days for the surface to settle. You may have noticed that something felt unbalanced inside you this week, but it didn't show up as chaos, it came through subtle tension. Through inner questions you couldn't answer. Through relationships that suddenly felt harder to hold, or easier to let go of. That's the Libra effect still working. The energy of balance doesn't always come as peace, it comes by exposing where there is none. For some, this echo triggered memories of old agreements, unspoken contracts in relationships that once felt mutual, but now feel heavy. You may have asked yourself, why do I keep showing up this way? Why does this dynamic feel one-sided? Why am I the one always adjusting? These are not emotional overreactions. These are soul-level prompts, the kind of questions that only surface when a full moon, especially in Libra, has done its job of illuminating imbalance. As the moon moved through Scorpio and then Sagittarius during this time, the emotional tone didn't exactly lighten, it deepened. Scorpio pulled everything inward. It stirred the corners of your inner world where past pain, fear, and attachment live. It's like being placed in a spiritual storeroom, where feelings you thought were resolved quietly rise to the surface again, asking to be looked at differently. Some of you may have noticed your dreams becoming intense, even strange. Themes of betrayal. Of love lost. Of truths that never had a voice. These are not random. They're retrievals. Your subconscious bringing forward what your conscious self has tried to ignore. Then Sagittarius took over, not to clear the fog, but to move it. Thoughts became scattered. Restlessness rose. Some felt a sudden urge to escape, to travel, to distract, to fix something quickly. But nothing really needed fixing. What was needed was presence. Because in these days, you weren't meant to act. You were meant to feel. To sit in the space where discomfort pointed to something deeper. And that's why, even in stillness, it felt like something inside you was moving. Emotionally, many felt they weren't in the right place. There was a subtle displacement. As if the self you once were no longer fit in the room you're standing in. As if the roles you've played in your relationships are too small now, too quiet for the voice inside you that's finally growing louder. That's not disconnection. That's transformation. But like all real growth, it begins with discomfort. So if you found yourself zoning out, If your body felt present but your spirit didn't. If you were caught in reflection, or swaying between emotional extremes without knowing why, this was why. The full moon didn't just pass through the sky. It passed through you. And in its wake, it left a map of where you're still holding imbalance, still carrying wounds, still whispering, "I'm okay," when you're not. This is not a mistake. It's not weakness. It's awakening. And if you were listening carefully, beneath the noise, beneath the reaction, there was a message waiting to be heard. A quiet sentence that drifted through your emotions like wine through leaves. One you may not have heard with your ears, but your soul caught it anyway. Look at what still hurts when no one is around. That's the work the full moon left you with. Not to analyze, not to solve. Just to witness. To trace the soreness back to its source. To notice what you're still adjusting to keep the peace, what you're still accepting out of fear, what you're still calling love when it might actually be obligation. These 3 days, April 14th to 16th, weren't about forward momentum. They weren't about figuring things out. They were about letting old energy rise, letting forgotten emotions breathe, letting your soul speak through the parts of you that ache. They were about preparing you for what's next, not by giving you clarity, but by showing you what's still in the way. So if you felt off, distant, overly emotional, or caught in thought loops you couldn't break, don't dismiss it. Don't brush it off as a random mood swing. It was a coded message from your own spirit. An echo of imbalance revealing itself before a new alignment begins. Because the moon doesn't just light the sky. It illuminates your shadows. And this time, it didn't come to blind you, it came to show you gently, quietly, what still needs to be healed. There are days when clarity doesn't come in words, and truth doesn't arrive in logic. April 17th was one of those days. On the surface, it may have felt like nothing special. But underneath, something subtle yet powerful was unfolding, an energetic state that can only be described as drifting through the veil. Not quite here, not quite there. Somewhere in between. With the moon forming a square to Neptune in Pisces, the entire emotional atmosphere softened. Edges blurred. Time lost its grip. And for many, this shift triggered a quiet sense of disorientation, not enough to panic, but just enough to notice that something wasn't quite landing. Thoughts felt slower, foggier. Memories rose out of nowhere. You may have forgotten what day it was, or wandered into a room and couldn't remember why you were there. It wasn't confusion. It was thinning. The boundary between the conscious and subconscious was becoming more porous. And through that opening, things started to speak, not loudly, but symbolically. This kind of energy doesn't come to explain. It comes to stir. You might have experienced strange coincidences, a song repeating in different places, a familiar name showing up unexpectedly, someone from the past crossing your path without warning. Dreams may have turned vivid or surreal, filled with colors or characters that felt meaningful, even if you couldn't make sense of them. Words overheard in public may have sounded like they were meant for you. And perhaps, for the first time in a long while, you paused, not because something made sense, but because something felt real. These were not accidents. They were encoded messages. The divine doesn't always speak in paragraphs. Sometimes, it speaks in echoes. Through repetition. Through resonance. Through the way your breath catches when something ordinary suddenly feels sacred. On April 17th, the fog wasn't hiding the path, it was the path. And those who are spiritually awake know, when logic fades, intuition begins to lead. It's tempting to interpret this kind of energy as being lost, ungrounded, or directionless. And yet, that's not what's happening. This is what transition feels like, not the start, not the end, but the tender middle. The space between who you were and who you are becoming. When the soul hasn't fully stepped into the next version of itself, but can no longer pretend to be what it was. That liminal space is sacred. Uncomfortable, yes. But holy. Because here, without a clear destination, you are finally free to ask the deeper question, what am I no longer called to follow? This is the spiritual purpose of fog. It doesn't come to confuse you. It comes to interrupt the illusion that you always need a plan. That your next step must be based on certainty. That your worth is tied to clarity. In truth, most transformation happens in the mist, in the wandering, in the waiting, in the soft collapse of what no longer fits. So if you found yourself drifting on April 17th, if your focus dissolved and your mind wandered, if you felt nostalgic for something you couldn't quite name or felt pulled towards something you couldn't explain, you weren't off track. You were inside the in-between. Where knowing is replaced by feeling. And feeling is led by resonance. This day wasn't about figuring things out. It was about surrender. Trusting the small signs. Following what glowed just a little brighter. Listening to what tugged at your attention for no obvious reason. You weren't supposed to control this energy. You were supposed to let it move through you. Let it speak through sensation, dream, timing, chance. There's a kind of sacred hush that comes with Moon, Neptune energy. The soul speaks in symbols. The body becomes a receiver. Reality starts to shimmer, just a little, as if something underneath is more real than what's above. It's easy to miss if you're rushing. Easy to doubt if you're trying to understand too much. But if you were willing to slow down, you heard it. That whisper wasn't accidental. That moment that caught your breath wasn't random. That feeling in your stomach when a certain memory returned, that was the message. And if you had to translate what this day was trying to say, it would sound something like this. You don't have to know where you're going. Just know what you're no longer called to follow. Let that be enough for now. Let the fog be your compass. Let the mystery be your guide. Clarity will return. It always does. But for now, trust what rises even if you don't yet know why. Because the fog never comes without purpose. It comes to shift your direction, not with answers, but with the quiet truth that what used to lead you, no longer does. You may not have noticed the exact moment it shifted, but something in the energy around April 18th and 19th felt tighter, hotter, more immediate. It wasn't chaos. It wasn't aggression. But there was a quiet urgency in the air, like the soul was being asked to stand taller, speak louder, take up just a little more space. For those attuned to inner movement, this was not just another end-of-week lull. It was a sacred ignition point. Within just 24 hours, two major transitions occurred. Mars entered Leo. The Sun entered Taurus. And between them, a subtle but powerful combustion began, not on the surface, but within. Mars, the planet of action, courage, and drive, left the emotional waters of Cancer and stepped into the bold fire of Leo. No more emotional overthinking. No more waiting for safety. This was fire energy, forward, expressive, uncompromising. And not long after, the Sun left Aries and rooted itself in Taurus, grounding that fiery momentum into something real, something tangible, something that lasts. That combination shifted the emotional climate in a distinct way. It moved us from uncertainty into assertion, from floating in emotional waters to feeling a firm need to act. To choose. To declare. And with that came pressure, not external, but internal. A kind of psychic compression that didn't scream, but pulsed. Are you going to move now, or wait until you break? This wasn't about chaos. It was about claiming something. And the soul could feel it. You may have felt it as restlessness. A tightness in the chest. A strong desire to say something you've held in. Or a pull to take up space in a way that feels unfamiliar, maybe even uncomfortable. That's because this isn't fire for destruction. It's fire for purification. Mars in Leo doesn't want to burn the world. It wants to burn away the fear. The hesitation. The hiding. At the same time, the Sun in Taurus brought a kind of grounding wisdom to this fire. Instead of exploding, the energy sank deeper. You might have found yourself reevaluating your values. Rethinking what matters to you. Asking, what am I really building? What part of me needs to be rooted before I move forward? This is not impulsive energy, it's considered, determined, earthy. And when that energy meets Leo's fire, what emerges is a new kind of momentum. One that's not just reactive. It's aligned. Still, there may have been moments where it felt like too much. Like something inside wanted to burst out. Some felt edgy, emotional, prone to sudden mood spikes or sharp words. That's not failure. That's the intensity of repressed energy looking for direction. The call to express yourself more fully, but without turning it into conflict. This is where discernment is essential. Because when fire rises, the ego often tries to hijack it. And yet, this wasn't a time for dominance. It was a time for honest visibility. For authentic presence. If you felt a deep urge to make a decision, to set a boundary, to show up more boldly, trust it. But move with intention. This fire carries weight. The choices made in this window carry long shadows. What you start now will not disappear quickly. It will take root. That's why this energy must be used consciously. Don't say it unless you mean it. Don't commit unless you're prepared to carry it. And don't act out of pride, act out of truth. This is sacred fire. The kind that doesn't explode, it purifies. It clears. It empowers. But it demands you know what you're doing and why. That's what makes this moment different. It's not about rage. It's not about pushing. It's about aligning your inner fire with your outer action. Speaking when the words matter. Moving when your heart is clear. Saying yes because your soul is ready, not because your fear is loud. Because here's the whisper this moment carried, beneath all the emotion, all the restlessness, all the almosts. What you do now carries weight. Move like you mean it. And if you truly heard that, it may have stopped you mid-thought. It may have made you breathe deeper before sending that message. It may have helped you realize that not every reaction deserves your energy, but some choices absolutely do. This moment, this quiet arrival of fire, wasn't about lighting a match and walking away. It was about building the kind of fire you can live beside. The kind that warms, guides, clarifies. The kind that shapes destiny slowly, deliberately, through the heat of presence. So if something in you began to rise this weekend, some truth, some urge, some knowing, pay attention. Don't rush. But don't ignore it either. Because fire like this doesn't ask for attention. It waits for permission. And once given, it moves. April 20th brought with it a heaviness that couldn't be seen, but certainly could be felt. Nothing loud happened in the sky. No eclipse. No solar flare. But deep within the energy field, something shifted, quietly, surgically, inevitably. The moon met Pluto in early Aquarius, and something inside many people moved. Not forward. Not upward. But inward. This was not a day of momentum. It was a day of mirrors. Of stillness. Of slow, quiet cracking from the inside out. You may have woken up feeling tired, even after rest. Or sensed a strange emotional density lingering through your morning. It wasn't depression. It wasn't laziness. It was your soul moving through a recalibration. And you were not alone. Many felt the need to pull back, to retreat into silence, to withdraw from conversations that suddenly felt too shallow or too noisy. It wasn't avoidance. It was protection. This was sacred interior space being carved out, and the world didn't need to be in it with you. Because when the moon meets Pluto, the sky doesn't shout, but the soul does. And what it brings up is not surface-level stress or daily distraction. It's core material. Unfinished stories. Patterns you thought you'd grown past, but that still live in your emotional muscle memory. You might have found yourself reflecting on an old relationship, a moment of past failure, a decision you can't quite forgive yourself for. You may not have planned to think about it, but it arrived anyway, uninvited, but necessary. That's how Pluto works. It doesn't wait for the perfect moment. It becomes the moment. Aquarius, the sign of vision and collective evolution, added another layer to this dynamic. It wasn't just personal healing, it was how your unhealed parts ripple into your connections, into your vision of the future, into how you show up for the people around you. This wasn't about feeling better. It was about asking, what part of me is still out of alignment with where I say I'm going? This alignment isn't always about doing. It's often about releasing. Letting go of something you've been dragging behind you spiritually, even if you thought you'd let it go years ago. A belief. A blame. A version of yourself that doesn't fit the frequency you're walking into. And so, if you found yourself emotional without reason, detached without guilt, reflective without clear purpose, that was Pluto moving through your inner mirror. Showing you the fracture lines you've tried to paint over. Not to break you, but to finally bring light into what's been sealed off. Some of you may have experienced a quiet breaking moment, a soft collapse inside. A realization that something is truly done. Not in a dramatic or angry way, but in a calm knowing that this part of me no longer belongs. That this connection has completed its sacred contract. That this version of you, the one you fought so hard to hold together, is finally ready to be shed. And when that moment hits, it doesn't always feel freeing at first. It feels like grief. Like the heart closing in, only to begin opening again. This is not stagnation. This is soul alignment. The uncomfortable process of releasing your grip on something you've over-identified with for far too long. Something that was once real, once needed, but is no longer who you are. That's why April 20th felt heavier than most. Because it asked you not to act, not to strive, not to fix, but to feel. To witness. To hold space for your own emotional gravity without rushing to escape it. Because what was being dismantled wasn't your progress. It was your attachment to what is no longer aligned. And beneath all of that, the silence, the stillness, the spiritual weight, there was a message. One you may have heard in the back of your mind. One you may not have had words for, but that your spirit understood instantly. Let what's ending end. Let what's breaking open become light. This is the sacred work Pluto does. It's not fast. It's not loud. But it's irreversible. It opens what must be opened. It releases what you've outgrown. And it returns you to your core, not the wounded core, but the eternal one. The part of you that was never broken, only buried. So if today felt too quiet, too deep, too still to explain, know that something inside you is being rearranged in silence. This is how truth returns. This is how healing begins. Not through fireworks, but through the holy moment of letting go without needing closure. Let the ending end. Let the space stay empty for a while. And trust that what breaks now is only making room for what was always meant to shine. Not everything the universe sends is loud. Not every message arrives with lightning, or fire, or clear words written across the sky. Some of the most important signals come in silence. Intention. In the way you pause in the middle of a sentence and forget what you were saying. In the way your heart gets heavy for no reason at all. In the way you look around at a life you once felt safe in, and suddenly question whether it still fits. This past week wasn't filled with explosive events or headline energy. It was quiet. Subtle. But undeniable to those who know how to listen beyond the noise. If you expected drama and didn't find it, you may have thought it was just a normal week. But if you're tuned into the soul's frequency, if you're awake to how energy whispers rather than shouts, then you likely picked up something else entirely. Because this week was layered. Gentle on the outside, but spiritually dense. It came with strange dreams, emotional echoes, flickers of memory you thought you buried. It brought flashes of insight in the most inconvenient moments, while doing dishes, while waiting at a red light, while staring into space for no reason. And in between it all, there was a pressure you couldn't quite name. Not overwhelming. Just constant. Quietly rearranging something within you. The truth is, there was a map this week. But it wasn't printed. It wasn't obvious. It was handed to those listening with their spirit, not with their mind. And if you were among them, if you sensed something moving beneath the surface, you've already been walking it. You didn't need to understand the whole thing. You didn't have to decode every sign. Some transmissions are meant to bypass logic entirely. Some are just meant to be felt. Because not every message is for translation. Some are just for confirmation. The kind that tells your soul, yes, something really is shifting. Yes, you really are being asked to move differently now. What's important is that you noticed. Maybe it was a conversation that stayed with you long after it ended. Maybe it was the silence between texts that said more than the words ever could. Maybe it was a dream that felt too precise to be random. Or a memory that returned and clung to you like it still had something to say. Whatever it was, if it kept showing up, if it kept nudging you, if it made you feel something without knowing why, it wasn't nothing. It was a message. Delivered not through sound, but through pattern. Through feeling. Through resonance. So let me ask you. What whispered to you this week? What repeated itself in silence? What thread kept weaving itself into your thoughts, even when you tried to brush it away? Because those are the places where the map was hidden. That's how the soul speaks when it's too deep to shout. And if you received even one hidden message this week, if something in you paused and quietly said, "That means something," drop a 111 in the comments or simply write, "I heard it." You don't have to explain it. Just acknowledge it. Because sometimes, the confirmation you need doesn't come from the universe, it comes from someone else whispering back, "I felt that too." This space, this channel, it's not for entertainment. It's not here to predict every twist and turn of your life. It's here for those moments when you already know something's happening, but you need someone to say it out loud. It's here to confirm what your intuition has already begun telling you. If this kind of content resonates with you, if you're not here for prediction, but for alignment, consider subscribing. Stay connected. Because the spiritual path isn't always filled with thunder. More often, it's a series of subtle recognitions. Quiet recalibrations. Silent understandings that rearrange you from the inside out. And if you know someone who's been feeling something this week they can't quite explain, share this with them. Because they may not need a lecture. They may not need advice. They may just need to know, they're not alone. That what they're sensing is real. That what they're moving through is sacred. Even if it has no name yet. This week didn't speak loudly. But it spoke clearly. And if your heart was listening, it heard more than most people will ever see. So breathe. Reflect. And don't worry if you couldn't put it all into words. You heard it. Even if you couldn't translate it.